Hello, everyone, from what's been a very dark and stormy evening here in Kuala Lumpur. A warm welcome to everybody tuning in from around Malaysia, and a special hello to all of you joining us from the rest of the world. This is the sixth in our series of webinars looking at urban financing, which is a collaboration between GDI and Think City. I'm Duncan Cave from the Think City Institute, which is a knowledge repository and capacity building organization established by Think City. And whilst we're based in Malaysia, we have an international outlook, looking to solve urban problems with our partners based from around the world, to apply best practice to real-life situations. Tonight, we have two speakers joining us. The first, dialing in from Washington, DC, is Elizabeth Boggs-Davidson, who is Director for SDG Impact at UNDP. And the second, from here in KL, is Luan Xie, who heads Sustainability at CIMB Bank. And they're going to be moderated by my colleague, Natalie O. And as I mentioned, this webinar series is the result of a partnership between GDI and Think City. Global Development Incubator, or GDI, creates new approaches to address persistent global issues. They're an incubator for transformational development ventures, and they work to build and scale the next generation of social impact solutions. They match ambitious leaders, strong concepts, and capital with the executional power required to launch and scale transformational development ventures. Think City is a social purpose organization based in Malaysia with the mission of making cities more people-friendly, resilient, and livable. As a regional city-making agency, Think City provides urban policy thinking, management, and implementation of urban solutions, while acting as a catalyst for change in the way cities are planned, curated, developed, and celebrated. Now, for some basic housekeeping, our format will be very short presentations from our two speakers, followed by something like a roundtable discussion, which will give everyone plenty of time to ask questions. Please let us know which speaker the question is for when you post it. And even if you don't have a question, join in the conversation in the chat box and let us know where you're listening in from. And before we go on, if you have connection problems, click the reconnect button at the top of the page. And if you still have problems, then try refreshing your browser and you'll be brought back into the room. And just a reminder, there's going to be a short survey towards the end, which would be very grateful if you could take a couple of minutes to fill out, as it will really help us to improve our content. So I think that's enough from me. I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Natalie O. She's a strategy and policy analyst at Think City, where she leads the urban finance initiatives and is currently managing the development of an urban finance platform and masterclass series. A trained geographer, she also specializes in strategic, advisory, and data analysis to find solutions for urban challenges. Good evening, Natalie. Thanks for taking the reins for tonight's webinar.
No, thank you, Duncan, for that introduction, and thank you to our international audience for tuning into our webinar. I hope you're seated comfortably and ready for what I believe will be a great discussion. So our past episodes on this series have extensively covered how cities can improve their ability to create and implement bankable, sustainable city projects. But today, we will turn it on its head and talk about sustainable finance. So you will hear from both an international and Southeast Asian perspective on the current and future state of sustainable finance, the investor decision-making process, and how we can improve local capacities for sustainable finance. So now I have the absolute pleasure of introducing you to our two panelists today. Our very first speaker is Elizabeth Boggs-Davidson. Elizabeth, if I could ask you to turn on your camera. So Elizabeth is the Director of SDG Impact, a global initiative of the UNDP, focused on eliminating barriers and driving more integrity for sustainable investment at scale. She is a senior executive, advisor, and global expert in social innovation and impact investing, with a strategic vision to create and deliver financing and business models that produce sustainable, scalable business development. So, Elizabeth, joining us today from Washington, DC. Good morning. Thank you for getting up to be with us. So I'm just handing over to you.
All right, thank you, Natalie. Good evening to all of you, and it's a pleasure to be here. So quickly on my role at the UN Development Program, or UNDP, which is the development network of the UN system and the steward and integrator of the Sustainable Development Goals. which means UNDP has a unique responsibility and role in defining what SDG enabling investment is and what it needs to achieve. So transparency and accountability in SDG investing were our goals when we launched SDG Impact on the margins of the General Assembly in September of 2018. How do you drive more accountability for claims that your investments are actually enabling the achievement of the SDGs? So that spring of 2018, we spent about 4 months interviewing investors and enterprises across asset classes, trying to understand why only a fraction of the globally invested assets of banks, of insurers, of pension funds, and corporations was contributing to the achievement of the goals, particularly when there was so much liquidity and so much interest in the Sustainable Development Goals. We learned that business and finance leaders view these goals genuinely as their guideposts for achieving responsible, sustainable, and inclusive growth. We found that most are interested in allocating capital to achieve these goals, but do not know the most efficient or effective way to deploy their resources. And other investors commented that they didn't know how to identify an SDG-aligned investment opportunity, and there was no available market intelligence to understand where that development priority might align with investment priority. So our goal was, how do we help to eliminate these very specific barriers and drive more investment capital for the achievement of the goals? So our team at SDG Impact has taken on the task of helping investors, helping bond issuers and enterprises understand how they can make a significant and measurable contribution towards the goals. Because while interest in ESG investing continues to rise, the evidence on whether such investing is really creating positive impact is not clear. So we're confident that given the right tools, the private sector will start to see its intentions translated into action. I forgot about this, sorry. So we know from our networks of country offices that investors don't know how to identify SDG-aligned investment opportunities, and there's no available market intelligence. So we have been we're currently piloting SDG Investor Maps. This is a new market intelligence that really distills where there are translating UN data that's collected throughout the system into investment-facing business opportunities. The data and analysis underpinning each of these maps will be uploaded to a dynamic platform and designed for investors come January. So you'll have to keep in touch with me and I'll be able to direct you to this new platform. The other core barrier that we're trying to solve for is really how do you help investors, bond issuers, fund managers, enterprises drive more investment activities specifically to the goals. So we have been developing practice standards. We entered this space because there just were no guidelines and no way to really measure and create integrity around claims that investments were actually advancing the goals. So the standards are a set of practices around strategy, around management, transparency, and governance. They're designed to provide a common language and best practice guidance for integrating impact management into business and investment practice. The standards, we think, provide that needed blueprint for decision-making and that guide for developing impact management systems within your fund or your bond issuance or your company. They're voluntary and freely available and can be used as a diagnostic tool for organizations to help align their internal processes and practices to better address sustainable development risks and opportunities. And we hope to facilitate and validate SDG contributions. So I'll stop now and hand back over to Natalie.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I think those were really interesting points about equipping investors with the guidelines and tools necessary. There's definitely that gap in the market, and I'm glad you're filling it. So I'll ask you to turn off your camera for now as we turn to our next speaker. But before we do that, just a reminder to the audience that you can post questions in the chat box on the side of the screen. So for our next speaker, Luan Xie, if you may join me now on this platform. Hello. So Luan is the head of group sustainability at CIMB, one of ASEAN's leading banking groups, where she is responsible for transforming CIMB into a shaper of sustainable finance and responsible banking in Asia. She has extensive experience in strategy and transformation, as well as change management. Luann has also been involved in a number of fields, including financial services and consulting. So, good evening, Luann. Thank you for being part of our webinar. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Right, so I think I'll just really quickly, because I see people from all over the world, which is really great. So I just wanted to introduce you guys to CIMB, where I work, just really quickly. So we're an ASEAN-based bank, but we're based out of Kuala Lumpur, and we operate in all 10 ASEAN markets, and we've got about 15 markets in totality, around 35,000 people, and we're a very young bank. We started as a stockbroker, and from a stockbroker from around maybe year 2000 to now 2020, we've grown by leaps and bounds, and now we've got about $140 billion in assets. So that's just a really quick introduction to the bank for which I work. To also, I guess, give you a bit of, because that will give a bit of background of the kind of the situation, the markets we're in. So this is what we do in terms of sustainability. Sustainability is actually something very new to CIMB. It only started in 2019, and how we look at it is really three core pillars. One is in terms of sustainable action, which is what we as a company ourselves can do. So looking at how do we, for example, reduce our negative impacts in terms of carbon footprint, but also how do we create positive impacts through, for example, diversity and inclusion to the people that we hire. Now, of course, what we're going to be talking about today is sustainable business, and this is what we do through our clients and what we facilitate and enable our clients to do. So we'll be talking a lot more about that. And of course, the third pillar is society, and that's CSR and philanthropy that we do. And of course, all that is underpinned by a risk and governance framework and stakeholder advocacy and engagement. So very much looking forward to today and the discussions that we will have. Thank you very much. Back to you, Natalie.
Right, thank you very much, Luann. If I could just ask you to stay with us. And Elizabeth, could you come back on? Hello, okay. So thank you very much, Luann, for that as well. It's great to see how CIMB is evolving as a bank to incorporate more sustainability. So I guess this is for the both of you. Before we dive into the discussion, I thought we could do a quick Sustainable Finance 101. So in one or two sentences, could you just tell me what sustainable finance is? Elizabeth, may I turn to you first?
So sustainable finance for us has now become SDG enabling finance. So that's really how we're defining it. How do you drive more interest and contributions and with a lot of integrity towards sustainable development goals?
That's great. And Luann?
Oh dear. I'm going to take more than two sentences. I hope that's okay.
That is
fine. To show kind of the things that we look at. So really, when we talk about sustainable finance as a bank, there are two sides to everything that we do. And this is our philosophy in general. We always try to minimize negative impact or harm. And at the same time, we try to maximize positive impact to community, society, and environment, etc. So it's always balancing those two sides of the coin. So when we say sustainable finance, yes, it is enabling things like the achievement of SDGs and financing that. But on the flip side of that is what kind of rules or requirements are we putting on the companies that we lend to in order for us to lend to them? So for example, we've got a minimum environmental and social requirements that we need our lenders in different sectors to meet before we say, okay, I will lend to you. And if they don't meet those requirements, we can actually say, okay, please, let's agree an action plan. So I believe both sides are as important, because we can keep financing positive impact, but if we don't stop the harm that many irresponsible companies are doing, then that kind of leaves out the other half of the equation. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. So, okay, now we're just going to build on that a little bit more just to frame it. And I will go back to what you just showed me, Luan, in a bit. So, Elizabeth, could you just generally tell me about the global state of sustainable finance at the moment, especially given the pandemic? How has that affected? Have things dried up? Have things exploded in interest for sustainable finance? Where are we?
No, I would suggest that interest in ESG and impact in sustainable finance has never been stronger. And I think you see that a growing number of investments and business leaders are really expressing goals beyond maximizing profits. So there's such a positive trend, I think, as a result of the world that we've been living, particularly this last year. I think that the 2020 marked by COVID and this catastrophic weather that we're experiencing, particularly here in the United States, have really disrupted daily life and for everybody. And so sustainable business and investment has become significantly more visible. And I don't have the facts and figures on the top of my head, but suffice it to say it's exponentially increased. And I think the work that we're doing at the UN is really anchored in a belief that investing for impact can and should be done by any investor. You don't have to label yourself as an impact investor. We want our tools to be available to mainstream investors, to value-aligned investors, anyone who's self-identifying as an impact investor. And we think that kind of wide adoption of changing behaviors, not just using these goals or using impact as a buzzword or a tagging exercise. How do you really change behavior and create more authenticity, which is what we're all about with our standards?
Oh, well, okay, that's very positive to hear. I'm glad that things are moving in a better way. It's some glimmer of hope after COVID-19. So, okay, Luan, do you feel like that's a similar sort of case in Malaysia, or how do you see sustainable finance playing out in our part of the world, Southeast Asia?
Yeah, thanks for that. I see a lot of our participants are from developing countries, and I have this discussion, with my peers on the principles for responsible banking network all the time, and it's the fact that our country contexts and the state of development and state of ecosystem development of the financial services sector, as well as sustainable finance sector is really, really different. So in ASEAN, for example, apart from maybe Singapore and maybe some parts of Thailand and Indonesia, sustainable finance is still really, really nascent, and there's been a lot of talk about it, but I think even if you spoke maybe 2 years ago about sustainable finance, people will give you a blank look in general, and but that is also a reflection of where the state of sustainability is in these countries, because many people that I talk to, so we run focus groups with people who can be in our customer segments, and when you say sustainability, they think, oh, how long is your company going to be around? Or, oh yeah, it's something to do with recycling, and it's not using plastic straws. So that is the level of kind of awareness and maturity where we are at now. And I would say sustainable finance is, I would say maybe slightly ahead of that, but not too far. So we have a long way to go.
Okay. So definitely a bit more catching up, and there's a bit of this lack of awareness or understanding of what truly sustainability is, let alone sustainable finance. Okay, in that case, then maybe we'll go back to a global space. So Elizabeth, I'm therefore curious, in terms of sustainable finance investors at the moment, are they typically drawn to certain things that they're more familiar with or sound sexy? So for example, climate change, over more social community programs that they might not understand. What are the general trends at the moment?
So yes, definitely. Part of this work that we've been doing to solve for lack of market intelligence is to create these new investor maps. We're really distilling kind of a large bit of information, all secondary data that's collected, and trying to arrive at these investment opportunity areas that correspond really tightly to the policy priorities. And what you see when governments sort of distill and define where their SDG Investment Map, their own sort of where their macro budget should be invested. You see, as you would imagine, with COVID, a lot of shifting of prioritization into areas that correspond to health, to education, certainly to renewable energy and to climate solutions. So we've been in the process of working to develop these maps, which distill these new investment opportunities. And I was sort of culling through, we have about 12 countries that have completed the exercise. And I was looking yesterday at some of the, where are some of the sustainable city solutions that are emerging? And we're definitely seeing some really interesting and helpful, I would suggest, investment opportunities that correspond to sustainable cities, which is our SDG 11. And so that have to do with urban housing situations, that have to do with certainly with renewable energy solutions, that have to do with water and sanitation solutions. So I think globally, the answer to your question is there's quite a lot of interest in climate related solutions. But I think as we're working with developing countries and helping them to distill their key policy priorities that also have an investment opportunity and potential, we find a broader range that have to do with a number of the social issues that you would imagine developing countries are trying to solve for.
Okay, that's really great to hear that because urbanization is happening at such a rapid rate, and I'm glad that more attention is being turned to sustainable cities. So Luana, if I may then ask you to draw on that. So do you feel in Malaysia, how are we doing on a Policyscape? Where do we go 5 years from now? Seeing as it's quite nascent in terms of the general policy and regulatory environment.
Yeah. So I would say that policy-wise in ASEAN as a whole, because that's where we operate, in terms of things like climate, in terms of energy, decarbonization, deforestation, etc., even social, I would say the policies are pretty far again behind where the developed countries are, and that in fact poses a challenge for companies like us, like CIMB, where we are trying to instigate people, our clients, to become more sustainable and trying to incentivize and encourage them to do that. But without the relevant regulations being in place, that is really difficult because you're a single private sector actor trying to pull a whole your whole client base along, and it's difficult as well unless we get the ecosystem moving and unless other financiers are also putting down the same requirements, because otherwise we are just forcing ourselves out of the market. Because if clients, the big clients, say that, hey, if you go to CIMB to ask for a loan, they're going to ask you 10 million questions. Go to the other bank down the road, they're not going to ask you a single thing about environment. So it's a fine balancing act for us. But we do see acceleration happening, especially in sustainable finance and even in the government. And I think one of the challenges that we have is that the various ministries sometimes they're not completely coherent, and it's hard for us to figure out, okay, so which one do we listen to? What do we do? Just as an example, we were setting an energy policy, and we were looking at the data for Indonesia, and depending on which government unit you were looking at, they all give you different numbers about the same thing, right? So yeah, it's challenging.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot there about needing more coherency and alignment from the top down, and that will help kind of mobilize the banking industry, so that everyone's on the same page and pushing for sustainable finance and growth, which is great. Okay, Elizabeth, might I ask, in that sense, how can investors sort of use SDGs not as a checklist, but now going forward into making it an active part of the decision-making process?
Great. So we've been thinking quite a bit about this, because if you're paying attention to the sustainability conversation and the impact conversation, you'll notice that there are a multitude of principles and tools and frameworks that already exist on how to integrate social and environmental considerations in your business and investing. Yet in this incredibly complicated landscape, where you have the principles for responsible investing, you have the IFC's operating impact management principles, you have the UN Environment Program as positive banking principles. So you have a lot of high-level principles which really set purpose and direction. And then in this crowded landscape, you also have a number of helpful, I think, new tools coming online that really, the Global Impact Investing Network has their IRIS, their Impact Reporting Investment Standards. So you have a lot of new performance metrics and tools to help you report and to define your KPIs. But what's missing is that common language that can be used by all actors and investors and analysts and multilateral organizations for what really it means, in our opinion, to be SDG enabling. What does this investment look like? And so what we've tried to do is to develop standards that really are a roadmap for how you operationalize those high-level principles, and then how do you actually use in a constructive, really helpful way the many new performance standards, metrics, tools that are also online. So what we've tried to do with these standards is provide that roadmap, that decision-making piece of the landscape that we thought was missing, the practice. How do you enable and facilitate decisions? How do you do those trade-offs for materiality? So how do you measure, manage, report, and disclose consistently on your SDGs? And that's really what's been motivating us over the last year and a half, as we've brought together really the lead thinking in impact management practice. And that's really what the standards are. They're tricky because they're not performance standards. So they're not a set of metrics. They're all about how you make those decisions and trade-offs in terms of defining what you think you're setting your goals and measuring and contributing to achieve those goals and outcomes.
Okay. So it's interesting to hear as well that on a global level there is a recognition. There's a lot of information and frameworks out there. So it's nice that you're finding a solution for it now and trying to distill it in a way that's accessible and everyone can be on that same page. So Luan, then may I ask you, seeing as it's still quite a nascent industry and CIMB is really trying to take the lead in terms of sustainability in the banking industry in Malaysia, can you tell me a bit how, for example, you recently provided a sustainability-linked loan. Tell us more about those performance targets you set for that particular product. What are you looking for? What are you not looking for? Yeah.
So sustainability-linked loans are kind of an instrument that we put out actually early this year. We had put out an allocation or a target of 3 billion ringgit. Sorry, not USD. 3 billion ringgit for a couple of years. Actually, a period of 3 years, 4 years. And as of a few months ago, we've already had 1 billion taken up. So it is something that, you know, customers and corporates are really kind of looking forward towards, because it's really a win-win. So essentially how it works is that when we sign on a client, we agree on a set of sustainability performance targets with the client. And essentially if the client meets the targets on a year-on-year basis, then they get a rebate, an interest rate rebate on their loan interest for that year. Yeah, so basically we're kind of incentivizing and helping you, encouraging you to you know, achieve your sustainability targets. Now there are a couple of things that we look out for though, because we need to be very careful that, you know, we're not greenwashing. So the first thing is that whatever targets that you choose, they must be material to your business. So, so for example, if you are a coal-fired power plant company and you say, okay, my performance target is to convert all my paper to recycled paper, then that is obviously not a material issue to you, right? So materiality is one. Secondly, we look at additionality. So whatever we incentivize you to do must be over and above what you're already doing or what you're already planning to do. And thirdly, the achievement of those targets need to be measurable and validatable. I don't know if that's a word, by us or by a third party. So but it's a very flexible instrument, because we align to your strategy and to your targets, and we can use it for any type of loan. It could be a term loan, it could be working capital, it could be anything. So yeah, that's really cool.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, so I've had ideas of materiality and additionality as the main driving factors behind sustainability linked loans. So Elizabeth, if I may ask you, how can international financiers work more with municipalities and other local partners like CIMB to kind of build that capacity for local financing, sustainable financing on sort of a national city level basis, whether it's blended finance or so on? What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, that would be maybe more, having worked in I spent a long time in Inter-American Development Bank, so a development finance institution, and our sort of ability to work and to source deals from municipal and subnational parties was really what we did quite a bit of, was risk sharing, sort of either enabling through our grant programs if we wanted to seed and to improve on a particular solution around renewable energy, for instance. We were working to set a fund that would be available for renewables with a municipality, and helping to de-risk and to crowd in other institutional and like-minded investors by agreeing to provide a guarantee that would essentially absolve first loss risk for that opportunity. So I have to say the UN is not an investment organization. The UNDP, where I'm working, is very much a development organization, but what we're trying to do is to enable impact investing and investing to the SDGs by removing some of the key barriers to crowd in that finance as well. So I'm not sure precisely how to drive more investment capital from my role into municipalities, other than doing what we're doing on our market intelligence, which is all about disclosing in a very transparent and helpful way where there are actual investable opportunities that have a need case, that have a return on investment, that have a regulatory regime that would be conducive to investing. And so our job is to distill these investment opportunity areas. Many of them are relevant for cities and municipalities, and to make those available on this online platform that we've done the UX design, and we're just working with developers now to upload this data so that an investor that's interested in investing in a solution, in an urban solution, will be able to search and sort according to country, according to sector, according to SDG, according to solution. So this is kind of how we're driving it, more from a tools perspective and less from a financial perspective.
Okay, well then thank you very much for putting on your IDB hat and your UNDP hat to answer that question. All right, then, yes, okay, Luann, I have a question regarding, CIMB again has been taking a very proactive approach. So what are the drivers that have encouraged CIMB to kind of pursue sustainability and continue growing and moving towards this sustainable city and sustainable finance moving forward?
A lot of people ask me that question. A lot of banks, especially with the "Are you crazy?" look, it's either "Are you crazy?" or "Are you planning to greenwash?" Because it is really quite a big commitment, right? So what really started us on this journey was institutional investors, and not local investors, but really global investors. The likes of the Norges, the BlackRocks.
Luann, are you still with us? We might be facing a little bit of technical.
If she's stuck, I can jump in, because we found a lot of interest, as Luann was about to say, and sort of asset owners really interested in improving that integrity conversation for their asset managers. So we've developed standards for private equity fund managers, and they can use these standards to put sustainable development and contributing to the SDGs at the heart of the fund's purpose. But investors are using the standards to really frame their investment guidelines for their fund managers and to identify the questions they would like to ask to their fund managers about what are the impact attributes of the funds, or otherwise how they're managing their internal work. And investees are starting to use these standards to design their responsible business and impact practices that they need to have to be able to report to their funds, and the funds need to be able to report up to their owners. So I think there's a range of interest coming from asset owners, asset managers, and investees, and how do we do this better? What is the common language we should be using? What are the right approaches we should be reporting on? So that's, anyway, Luann, I was trying to fill in for you because you were frozen.
Thank you.
Yes.
My apologies.
I tried to pick up on that investor and the owner aspect.
Yes, Luann, sorry, would you like to continue where you left off? We were talking about a lot of banks asking you and people asking you, why are you doing this? Are you crazy? So start from there.
Yeah, so true answer is number one, the first trigger was institutional investors. And they started asking us really difficult questions about, what's your policy around deforestation? What's your policy around modern slavery? And at that point, this was 3 years ago, we were like, what is this modern slavery thing? Anyway, so that was a long time ago. And, so that was the primary trigger. And then, when we started kind of discussing and researching the topic in a lot more detail, then we started realizing that, wow, that this is a big thing. And this is something that our stakeholders want. So we checked with our employees, we checked with our customers, and yeah, we talked to the regulators and everybody, all our key stakeholders really wanted it. And yeah, and that is, and I guess we also did it at the right time, because at that point we were reviewing our long-term strategy. So because it came in at the right time, we managed to get sustainability embedded into the core strategy of the business. So that's one of the reasons why we've managed to kind of accelerate pretty quickly in the journey.
Okay, so it's interesting that both of you then talk about this growing demand and momentum for sustainable finance and integrity and transparency. So I guess that's going to be a rising movement, as well as my Generation Z, inspired by Greta Thunberg and David Attenborough, all call for more sustainable actions, and to make sure that they are actually not greenwashing, but doing what they say they're doing. So I guess that kind of brings me to the future of sustainable finance. So from Elizabeth, your point of view on a global level, what is needed to continue this growth in sustainable finance and ensure that it is indeed going to the right places? Quick overview of our future.
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking about 2021, which is on everybody's mind, especially if you're in the United States and wanting a transition of government, but I think it's really an inflection point. And, this whole trend of stakeholder capitalism, there are a lot of buzzwords around this, but I think what it really means, this trend that I'm seeing and that I'm quite optimistic that will continue into 2021, is that sustainability and impact will be at the heart of really driving the investment community. And I think taking a much more holistic view beyond the short-term financial value and appreciating that interconnectedness of broader economic and social value is going to really drive that long-term performance, and I think is going to really motivate a lot of investment in the short term. I think enterprises are starting the process to actively transition to a more sustainable future by reducing negative impacts already. And I think that's really at the heart of our mission and vision at UNDP, to really advance this conversation and to provide some really helpful guidance. It's freely available on the market for Luann and for everybody to have a look at, in case it's just helpful for really embedding impact and making that really the the purpose of the investment strategies moving forward.
I love what you said about putting it at the very heart, which I agree. We need to take a more holistic look at how we do everything really and the impact we want to leave. So Luann, where do you see sustainable finance in Malaysia going in the next 5 years? Local perspective.
Yeah, so again, I would answer on an ASEAN perspective. So the first set of sustainable finance guidelines, as far as I know, was put out in Singapore in 2015. That was the first in ASEAN. Now, within just the last 1 year, we've had a number of central banks in the region starting to do this as well. So the Central Bank of Philippines, the Bank of Thailand, the State Bank of Vietnam, all of them have now put out frameworks to say, okay, these are the minimum things that I want you to have in terms of roles and responsibilities, screening, and by the way, the Central Bank of Philippines wants stress testing within 3 years, which is ambitious, yeah. And you know, Bank Negara in Malaysia, the central bank, is developing its own taxonomy. So things are accelerating at a really breakneck pace in ASEAN, and yeah, I think, you know, although it will take some time for I think.
Right. Yes. Okay. Sorry, Elizabeth. Are you
No,
able?
but I was thinking that as she was speaking, since she's frozen, that this interest in among governments and policymakers to really want to direct capital more specifically towards aligning with their priorities around sustainability and the Sustainable Development Goals is also a new shift, and that's really also informing the private investment markets, particularly when you're starting to look at bond issuance that's exploded because of COVID and because of the social challenges, and governments are willing to take on this debt if it's very tightly connected to recovery and to, you know, climate solutions. So it's kind of an interesting time where government is directing some of this investment in a very positive direction as well. All right, Luann, I'm trying to fill in for you. You're getting trickier.
I'm sorry. So I went and checked if my husband was streaming something in the room, but he wasn't. So yeah, don't know what's happening. Sorry, I'm the nightmare panelist.
No, not at all. Do you want to finish your thoughts on yes, where we're going with ASEAN at the moment? So breakneck speed. Yeah, breakneck speed. I'm done. Oh, okay. Full stop. We're just ending there. We're going at breakneck speed. All right, I see you've hit the 45-minute mark, so I will stop hogging you both for myself and open it to the floor. So we have a question from Catherine to you, Elizabeth. Asia cannot move quickly to a European standard of green without curtailing its social and economic development. Your thoughts on this?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question very well. Can you just repeat it?
Yes, so currently Asia is, as we've discussed, kind of lagging behind European standards of green and social and sustainability. And I guess her point is, can Asia move to this new standard without curtailing its social and economic development? Your thoughts on this, whether we have to sacrifice our economic development to meet these SDG standards?
No, I think to the contrary. I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests that the more you focus on your communities and on your environment and your investment, the better your returns are shaping up. And so I think those trade-offs are not going to happen. To the contrary, I think that the more you look, the more you measure and report and think about those outcomes as they affect the communities where you're working, the more success you will have in your investment portfolio. I'm just gonna shut my blinds for 1 second. I'm hearing you, but I'm gonna get up for.
That is fine. Then in that case, Luann, I will turn to you.
Can I answer that question?
Yes, of course you can. Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, and this is a debate that we have all the time, right? Because the local folks are saying, hey, you know, oh, you can't just look at what all the Western countries are doing. You know, they're very rich and they don't need to worry about all these things. So yeah, we can just sit back because we're poor. So that is the argument that we always get, right? So the question is, should we try to adopt some of these standards or should we not? So and realistically speaking, I mean, it is a bigger challenge in our part of the world, in developing countries, because there is still a significant proportion of the population that are still, struggling to put food on the table, send their kids to school, basic things like that. So that is true. And when you come to talk about the exclusionary part of sustainable finance, so for example, not financing coal, then comes the debate of, oh, well, we're going to leave like 1 million people without energy, without power, so how are they going to get out of the poverty cycle, et cetera, et cetera. So now all that, so in our part of the world, the EES balance between economic and environmental and social becomes a lot more stark, and it needs a lot more careful considerations. But then the question is, then what, right? Does it mean that we have free license to pollute and to cut down all our forests and to, spew out tons of carbon dioxide from coal plants? No, it doesn't, because you're just signing your own death warrant too, right? So it's not okay. I mean, fine, it wasn't okay that many of the countries were colonized hundreds of years ago, and things happened. That was not okay, but that is also not okay for you to now say, oh, because all this happened to me, now it's my turn to go and destroy my environment, so you should let me do it. I don't buy that. And the worst thing is, a lot of the time, the people who put out this debate to say that, hey, let the Western countries do it because it's a Western thing. Who are these people? These are the guys who own businesses. Are they poor? No. Do they actually care about economic development? Or maybe their own economic development, but a lot of the time, these are the same guys exploiting their workers and underpaying them. So the problems are real, and it's tough to navigate. But I don't buy the, oh, that means we don't do anything and we can't do it argument.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's definitely it always, who is pushing that narrative, I suppose, is your point. And I guess it's also about how people need to understand it's a very integral part of development as well. It's sustainable development goals, so it is still pushing for that development, and it's how we do it in the local context. I have a question from Ahmad Zaki in Afghanistan for both of you. So could you please shed some light on city financing in cities like Kabul or countries like Afghanistan where financial institutions are not well established? Elizabeth, could I turn to you first?
Sure. I mean, this takes me back to this market intelligence that we've been so keen on trying to implement. We've started with these 12 countries and we're moving to 25 already for 2021. But there is very little awareness of where there are opportunities to invest that will make that needed impact and align specifically with the country's key priorities. And we found that this was, despite a lot of development finance activity globally, that specific market information to help the investor, really targeted at the investor, which includes some key economic factors, some enabling factors, what are the key risk factors, and having a more granular appreciation of investable opportunities can solve for some of this lack of capital flowing towards important and impactful programs in countries like Afghanistan. So that's really our ambition. We've worked on this market intelligence in 6 African countries that will be sharing the results in early January on this new platform. We have China, we have India, hopefully Malaysia's in the mix soon. And we have a number in Europe and in Latin America. So our ambition is to really roll this methodology as far as and fast as we can, because we think it will at least give investors some more necessary information about, not just the need case and the beneficiary, but some of those important economic factors like market sizing, return on investment. And in my previous role, if I were to have this kind of information, it wouldn't alleviate my need for structuring these deals. I'd have to have boots on the ground or have some capacity to be able to actually design the investment project, but it would absolutely direct my origination to very specific areas that have been distilled through this UN process to arrive at these investment opportunities. So that's kind of a long way to answer that question, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's that's good that we now have this increasing, because data is such a huge part of how we do things now, especially with technology being so prevalent. So I'm glad that it's being pushed to help financiers design their approach to sustainable finance. So I have this question from Anja in Madagascar to both of you. What strategy can we adopt to have sustainable financing for activities? She is coming from a perspective of a department working in waste management, which irregularly receives financial resources from the municipality, which always causes insufficient funds in our activities. Okay, so I think what she's asking is about a strategy to overcome the irregularity that city owners have in their funding. I guess how to tap more into sustainable financing. Yes. Elizabeth or Luann? Elizabeth?
That's all yours, Luann.
I was going to say, I guess, so I'm reading the question. I guess it depends if you're, private sector or public sector. Yeah, sorry, I don't think I can help much there.
Okay, then maybe we'll turn it more into, all right, Elizabeth, then in terms of you collecting data on the ground, how, since we're on the topic of regularity, how do you ensure that the data collected is consistent and that it's collected over a long period of time and it's comparable between the different the different countries? Because from Malaysia's point of view, I'm a data analyst. I like data all the time. So how are you ensuring that the stuff you're collecting is regular and consistent?
Right. Well, the sources of information that underpin the methodology are common throughout the UN system, from national development plans, and so there's a set of documentation that needs to be in place to initiate the activity, which really is generated by the government and the UN system. And then we've codified this market intelligence into a careful methodology, which really helps our country offices who manage this process with local data analysts on the ground. And the expectation is, the way the methodology works is that it's really grounded on secondary data research, but then informed very specifically through conversations with policymakers and then with investors in a particular sector. And so when the business model is created, it's been built on having specific conversations with investors who are also investing in that particular area. And the expectation is that the UNDP manages this process, really is the knowledge broker for this new market intelligence. And it will be required to update this information on an annual basis is what we have in mind, to refresh the data to make sure it stays current, particularly as the enabling factors are quite in flux in many environments today. So it will be important that we provide that quality assurance and quality control to make sure that the data is sustained and improved or sustained over time. So we're kind of building this out as I'm speaking. It's brand new, and we're just hoping, we're trying actually to scope the job description for how we're going to manage this dynamic platform and make sure that we work with our network of 170 country offices to help keep this information current as this methodology expands globally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, it's interesting to hear about how the UNDP plays that role in ensuring quality assurance and ensuring that information is sustained. So I'm going to ask you both for your final comment, but to buy you a little bit more time, just to ruminate. Yeah, I thought this has been a great webinar. I've had a lot of great insight from the both of you, both on how we need more coherency in our governance structures, and that there's this positive movement towards sustainable finance. And despite it being exciting and new, there's a lot more work to be done, whether it's data harvesting or, again, on the governance forefront. So Luann, if I might turn to you, what are your final comments?
Yeah, so I would say that, you know, sustainable finance, especially in developing countries and in countries where it's not a requirement from the central banks and regulators, is tough. But it is really our responsibility, and also it's being prudent. It's risk management as well. So although it might sound difficult, just start doing it. I don't know who is in financial services here, but just start doing, and you learn by doing. I mean, I started 2 years ago. I didn't know anything about sustainable finance, and I learned on the job. And the more you give by, you know, sharing and talking to people, the more you learn. So really, just start.
Wow, there you go, everyone. That's a call to action from Luann. So you better do it. Elizabeth, may I turn to you for wisdom?
Right. Yeah, so maybe I'll make a plug for these standards after Luann that, you know, as I mentioned, there's several tools or principles and frameworks already exist on how to integrate social and environmental considerations in your business and investing. Yet in this crazy landscape that's complicated, nobody has really paid attention to practice how we get things done, not just what things are get done. So our sort of feeling is that unless and until you change behavior and really think about this and want to be, you know, thinking about a positive return, we won't achieve real change. And so we're hopeful that these new standards will make it easy for investors to change behavior.
Absolutely, I hope that as well going forward. We will adopt a more positive impact approach. So on that note, I'd like to thank you both for joining me today. I think it's been really a wonderful webinar. So on that note, I'll pass my mic back to Duncan from Think City Institute to take us away. Duncan, your mic might be off. Duncan, we still can't hear you, but I can do my best to round us off. No, we can't hear you. Yep. So I'd just like to thank everyone today. I believe my colleague Donnie has put a survey. So if you could complete that, that would be really helpful. So it would help us inform how we go forward with our webinars. We're also developing a masterclass, that's my own plug, on sustainable finance and the project preparation process. So do look out for that. And I guess on that note, I wish you good morning, good night, good evening, wherever you are. And thank you very much for joining us today.